Alright, hello and welcome to today's episode of the Grain-Free Gallon. As you can see, we're in a little bit different scenery here today. We're not in the stall milking the cows. We're actually just out here in the field. This is where the cows roam and graze and spend most of their time. And in today's episode, we're going to talk about lactose intolerance and raw milk and how those kind of interface and why a lot of people who have dairy sensitivities, lactose intolerance, actually can consume raw milk and not have an adverse reaction. And they can have it with, in many cases have it without problems, or their usual symptoms that they would get when drinking dairy are a non-issue. So we're going to talk about that because anytime, especially me personally, I get on my soapbox of raw milk and why it's so good and why it's so healing and beneficial, one of the things I bring up is exactly that people who have dairy sensitivities can oftentimes consume it and they don't have an adverse reaction. So why is that? And we have a pretty awesome prop here today, which is this guy right here, a half gallon of raw milk that we just milked this morning. So we have a half gallon of our liquid gold here. So let's go ahead and get started. Why is it that people can consume raw milk who otherwise, when they have other dairy, have lactose intolerance and all the symptoms and things that go with that? Why can a lot of people consume raw milk like this and they don't have their symptoms? So milk like this, right, has a ton of stuff in it, but primarily one of the main active ingredients, we'll call it, that's in this milk is something called lactose. It's something that we're all familiar with. Even if you don't know exactly what it is, you've certainly heard of it. And milk, just like this, has a bunch of lactose in it. So that's normal, we all know that. Essentially, all lactose is really, it's the sugar. It's the naturally occurring sugar of the milk, okay? And milk also, in its natural state, when it hasn't been tampered with, has another active ingredient in it, something that's very important, and that's an enzyme called lactase, okay? So you have lactose, which is a sugar, and then you have this enzyme called lactase, and what lactase does, its purpose is to simply break down and help digest and break down the lactose, okay? So you see what's going on there. Nature has perfectly provided us an awesome system. Everything's great. Well, here's the problem. With store-bought milk that you're going to buy in the grocery store, even if it's organic, grass-fed, legally to sell it in the store, they have to pasteurize it, okay, to make it safe for us to consume. They have to clean up your milk, right? And we've talked about it in other videos, but just briefly to remind you on exactly what pasteurization is, it's where they heat up the milk to a certain temperature to kill off all the bad stuff that's in our milk, okay? And I say that sarcastically, obviously, but that's the idea behind it. Well, the problem is when they pasteurize it, when they heat it up to a certain point, something very important happens. They kill off the lactase, the enzyme, that live enzyme lactase is wiped out. It's gone. It gets killed off in the pasteurization process and leaves you only with lactose, but nothing to help break it down. The naturally occurring lactase is gone. And then obviously what happens? A lot of people are not able to fully break it down. They're not able to fully digest it, utilize it. So they say, oh, I'm lactose intolerant, I can't consume any dairy, right? And then the real crazy thing that happens is people will then go oftentimes and take artificial lactase, or they make different milk products for people with lactose intolerance where they then put in artificial lactase in the milk, when it was already there to begin with. He didn't have to do that. It was already perfectly put together like this guy right here, right? But then they heat it up, kill it off, and then come out with these different artificial versions to help you break it down. So, long story short, to recap, when you have raw milk, like what we get here, it hasn't been tampered with. It has all the enzymes to break down the lactose, okay? So your body doesn't have to go in a stress response to try to deal with it. It's already there. So I hope that gave you guys a little bit of clarity, and be sure to stay tuned next week when we're going to talk about why I love raw milk and why I became so passionate about raw milk, right? Because it might seem very odd. Why is this guy always talking about raw dairy and how good it is for you? Well, we're going to talk about that in the next episode. I will see you next Friday on the Grain-Free Gallon.